Welcome, everyone. Before we get started, please note that the information shared in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your mental health professional or other qualified health providers with any questions you may have regarding your mental health. Never disregard professional advice or delay seeking treatment because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you are in crisis or think you may have an emergency, call your doctor, go to the nearest emergency room, or call emergency services immediately. If you are feeling suicidal or in emotional distress, contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of any affiliated organizations. And with that being said, your access has now been granted. I am your host, Dr. Dexter Daniel. And this is In the Lab Podcast, the #1 show for real talk, straight facts on all things mental health. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're in the lab with me. And this is episode 1, y'all. This is episode 1. We are underway. This is the official launch of the In the Lab Podcast. Happy to have you all here with me. I can't believe that this is actually happening. This has been in the works for quite some time, and if you know, you know, and if you don't know, I'm just happy to have you here with me along this journey, and I'm really excited about getting this started. So today's episode is really just going to be a brief overview about what mental health is. So before we really get into that, I just want to provide you all with an introduction about how In the Lab really came about. I was actually just reflecting on this, I think just yesterday, and realized that In the Lab as a concept has actually been in existence for about 10 years. So I came up with In the Lab back in 2014. Crazy to think that it's already been 10 years and 2014 is actually that long ago. But time flies. When you don't even realize it, but time really be flying sometimes like that. But 2014, I came up with In the Lab, and In the Lab actually started out as a blog back when blogging really first came about. Shout out to all the bloggers out there. I know the focus these days has been so much on, social media posts and podcasting and things of that sort. But back in my day, 2014, blogging was a thing. And essentially, In the Lab really maintained the same focus on all things, mental health, social emotional well-being, relationships, things of that sort. So I would put out weekly blog posts that I would put up on Facebook and just talk about, various topics pertaining to those things. And at some point, it actually stopped for a variety of different reasons. I would say, life was life, and my focus kind of got put elsewhere. But over some time, I was actually able to bring back In the Lab in a different capacity, on a different platform, where I was able to host discussions on very similar topics and continued along those same lines. And eventually that ended up stopping too, but something in me felt like there was much more to do. Like In the Lab couldn't stop where it was at. And I think that there was an opportunity to kind of venture into something else and continue the conversation around mental health, around social emotional well-being, really just doing anything, playing my part to do anything to help improve the lives of other people, which really speaks to my purpose, my passion in helping people, which is what I do. And I want to say maybe about a year ago, I think the idea to create a podcast really came about, and started off as like a little whisper, probably by God, I would say, and it just never stopped. And with the encouragement of friends and family, finally was able to put it together, and here we are with episode 1 on mental health. So consider today to be a class of sorts, just giving you an overview about what mental health is. So this is Mental Health 101. Before we really dive into it, and before I kind of go over what the agenda is going to be for today, just to give you additional background. So my background is actually in social work. So I'm a licensed Master of Social Work in the state of New York. I am licensed to practice psychotherapy, which is what I do. I've been in the profession, in this industry, for about 10 years now. So shortly, right around the same time I came up with In the Lab, I actually completed my master's in social work. At that time, recently this past May, I graduated, got my doctorate in social work as well. I've been practicing psychotherapy for the last 2 years as of this past August. And I love what I do. I really love what I do. I really love social work. I feel like social work is me and I am social work. I feel like I found something that really spoke to the things that I believe in. And when you find work that aligns with what your core values and what your core beliefs are, then it doesn't really feel like work at the end of the day. You know what I mean? So I feel as though that helping people really is a gift of mine, is a God-given gift. And I'm happy and appreciative of being in a position where I could do that on a day-to-day, as taxing as that may be. But, sometimes you got to sacrifice some things. And I do believe that the gifts that you're given are not just meant for you, but they're really meant for the benefit of other people. So I feel as though I have a responsibility in doing that in whatever capacity I could do that, whether it's in sessions with clients or on a podcast, just sharing information. I do believe that we have a responsibility for sharing information with people that can better them and that can improve their lives. At least that's what I believe for myself. So the premise behind creating In the Lab was really focused on helping people, in a sense, improve their relationships, not only with themselves or with other people, but I think with society as a whole, with the world, whoever it is that you're interacting with. But I think just as importantly, I think it's important that people learn how to improve their relationships with themselves, right? So the way in which I want to go about doing that is really cultivating and facilitating conversations, culturally relevant conversations on a global scale around mental health. And I think what better time than now? You know what I mean? Because I feel like the conversations around mental health has really been picking up as of lately, which I think is a phenomenal thing. I love the fact that the focus and the attention that mental health is getting as a whole is due. I think it's about time. And I love the fact that we're picking up on it. The thing that I kind of want to address, and I think this is where I believe that this platform can really differ from everything else that's out there, is this emphasis on making sure that I give people credible information. And that is of utmost importance, honestly, because I think that when it comes to news, when it comes to media, a lot of people are being steered wrong. I think a lot of people are being steered the wrong way. There are a lot of misconceptions, a lot of misunderstandings, particularly about mental health, especially within the Black community, within minority communities, that I think is keeping people away from the help and the support that they can benefit from. And I want to play my part in making sure that I give people that information that they need that is reliable and dependable and valid. I remember in undergrad, I took a course on journalism. It was an elective. I had no interest in journalism whatsoever, but it was an intro course. I needed the credits. I need to get my GPA back up because freshman year, I did some damage freshman year. But nonetheless, I took on this journalism course, and I don't remember much from that class except for the importance of checking your sources. Checking your sources is so important. And as passionate as I am about making sure that people have credible information about mental health and the things that we're going to be discussing on this platform, I believe that it's really important that the information that I share with you all are going to be things that you can trust this source. And fact check me. I'm not going to say I'm perfect. I know I'm far from perfect. I don't think I'm going to be perfect. But I know for a fact that I'm going to do my best in giving you all 100% effort and making sure that I'm providing you with the things that you need that is reliable and dependable and valid. So you will see that I'm going to provide you all with the sources of the things that I'm going to be talking about so you can fact check them yourself. Feel free to comment below. Give me your take on it. Send me your opinions, whatever you think is coming to mind for you, whether you agree or disagree, whatever questions you may have. I'm really open to the discussion and really want this to be a discussion. You know, like let this be between you and me. I'm here for you, and I really want to make sure that I'm providing you all with the things that you need to advance this conversation. But like I said before, I'm really appreciative of the fact that, you know, this conversation around mental health is picking up, and I think that it could really only go up from here. And I just want to make sure that it continues going up from here. So I'm going to make sure that I play my part when it comes to that. So again, the vision behind In the Lab is really to improve relationships with the self and others, helping other people to do that through culturally relevant global discussions on mental health, with the hopes to increase access to evidence-based, credible information on mental health, to improve communities, to improve relationships, and to improve individual well-being. The doctorate program that I was a part of really opened up my eyes in making sure, and I think this also adds to my emphasis about making sure that I provide you all with credible information. When I was doing my research, obviously in academia, you better make sure that you cite your sources. You can't just be claiming stuff just for the hell of claiming it without backing it up, you know? So I always knew that in undergrad. I knew that in grad school. I especially knew that in my doctorate program too. And my doctorate program really placed a great emphasis on how to share information, which I think kind of influenced, or I would say kind of put the battery in my back to start this podcast, because there's a lot of information that's out there that people need to get their hands on. And like I said, you know, I'm going to do my part in making sure that people get their hands on it, because I think a lot of people don't know where to get it from. They don't even know how to start to look for the information that they need. They don't know how to access the supports and the services that they need. And I know other people do this too, not just social workers, but the heart and soul of social work is being able to link people to the things that they need, and learning about the importance of sharing information and how to go about doing that really just kind of lit the fire under me to do my part in making sure that I get this information out there to people. So this is how today's episode is going to look. Again, episode 1, Mental Health 101. Gave you all a brief background and context for how this show started, you know, where I came about, you know, kind of a brief overview of my trajectory into social work and where I'm at right now. I want to give you all an overview about what mental health is, you know, defining exactly what it is and why it's important. And then to do that, you know, I'm going to go over some common mental health disorders that people may be familiar with, or you may not be, hence why, you know, we're going to have this discussion today. Then I also want to go over some stigmas and myths about mental health. I believe that a lot of people are not getting the help that they need because they have some beliefs about mental health that I think needs to be debunked. I think that there's a lot of misinformation that's out there that needs to get cleared up, and In the Lab is here to make sure that we clear that up. So we're going to go over some of these misconceptions, these stigmas, these myths about mental health. Then we're going to kind of get into some current events, some articles that I came across regarding mental health that I thought would be really helpful to go over with you all, and hopefully kind of spark a conversation around these things. And then we're going to get into a segment where we're going to be helping some people who are seeking advice on their particular issues. And then I'll also share with you a couple suggestions on how to manage and mitigate your stress. All right. So I'm going to be providing some evidence-based strategies and techniques on how to go about doing that. And then we'll wrap up with the review and then get on out of here. I don't want to overwhelm you all with too much, being that this is the first episode and we're going to be in this for the long haul. So we got time. We definitely got time. So just be patient with me. I'll be able to get to your questions, to whatever it is that you need answers on. And feel free to send me a message, or, put something in the comments. Let me know what's something that you want to discuss. I got a plethora of different topics that I'm going to be going over, but I'm definitely open to getting into anything that probably hasn't come to mind for me that might be at the forefront of your mind. So feel free to hit me up at any time. Comment below. You can send me a message as well if you'd like, and we'll make sure that we'll get to it. So while we go ahead and get started, let's get into this overview of mental health and exactly what it is. So when we talk about mental health, really what we're referring to here is the emotional, psychological, and social well-being of the individual, right? A lot of times when we talk about mental health, I notice that people kind of use it or refer to it in a very broad way and just think that it's really just about the mind and how healthy your brain is, which, yes, that does play a huge part, but there are other components that do play a factor as to when speaking about the condition and the quality of your mental health. So when we talk about mental health, keep in mind that we're talking about one's emotional, psychological, and social well-being. All right. So mental health really does affect the way that we think, how we feel, and how we act. And it also helps to determine how we handle stress, how we relate to other people, and also our ability to make healthy choices at that. So it kind of makes sense because I think the things that we do really do depend on the state of our mental health. If you're in a good place, chances are you're going to want to do things that's good for you. And when you're not in a good place, mentally speaking, then life sucks. I mean, there's really no other way to put it, to be honest with you. It seems like everything is just dismal. Everything is it's just not what it's supposed to be. It's not where it's supposed to be. And it's miserable. You know what I mean? So to negate the importance of one's mental health is really being delusional. I would go as far as to say delusional about the importance of your mental health, and really just understanding that the quality of your mental health, I think, really sets the tone for your experiences in general, especially in life. So it's important to really understand that it's really important to understand how important it is that mental health plays a role in the decisions that we make, how it is that we relate to other people, and even just how we handle difficult, situations. And it's really important at every stage of life at that too, from childhood to your teenage years and well into adulthood at that too. And as of lately, there's been this huge emphasis, especially on child mental health, right? Kids be going through it too. They go through it. And I think over recent years, we've seen this emphasis being placed on the well-being of children, especially from a social emotional standpoint. Now, aside from what I do, being a psychotherapist, my day-to-day work also includes working in education. And there's been this emphasis, especially here in New York, and I know more so around the country as well in the United States, but there's been this emphasis on addressing social emotional well-being, especially for children. Because, and I think a lot of therapists would also agree with this as well too, the things that people end up coming, and this is what I've noticed in my personal practice and in my personal experience, in my professional experience, the people that end up coming to see me for therapy, I would go as far as to say 100% of them are addressing issues that stemmed from their childhood. Now, you might say to yourself, well, no, duh, that's obvious, right? Well, you would think that it's obvious, but I noticed that when I start working with people and I have them start to connect the dots to the things that they want to address, and when they notice that there are certain things that are coming up for them, but they can't quite explain exactly what it is that's happening to them, they can't put their finger on it. There's a reason why we go all the way back to your childhood. There's people think about, somebody laying on the couch and just like looking up at the ceiling, and people like talking about their childhood. I remember when I was 4 years old, and the ice cream man, ran out of ice cream, and it was a very traumatic experience. And something like that might seem really light, but there are things that might be associated with that people never fully processed because they didn't know how to. And I think the things that are happening in our formative years, even as infants, as babies, going into your toddler years, then, becoming older children at that, and then going into your teen years, these things that happen to us, if they don't get checked, they're going to impact us later on in life. It kind of resembles the analogy of sweeping things under the rug. For those of us who have this tendency of not wanting to address issues, we tend to sweep things under the rug. Well, you may not see the dust particles, firsthand, but after a while, as time goes on, you're going to start to see that dust accumulate under that rug. And that rug is not going to be some flat piece of, cloth or whatever that's on your floor. Yeah, it might cover up the dust pile, but you're going to see a pile in the middle of your floor. And it gets to a certain point where you can't miss it. And you might actually end up tripping over it if you try to continue walking past it. So it gets to a point where you just can't ignore these things. And then what ends up happening is people walk into my office, or my virtual office, so to speak. But, my in-person sessions will start pretty soon, God willing. People end up coming to see me, finally willing to address this pile of dust that they might have been sweeping under the rug. And a lot of times people don't know how that dust got there in the first place. And that could be very accurate. A lot of times things happen to us that we really have no explanation for, which is why people are seeking answers in therapy. So, which is why, I always, condone or, promote people to seek therapy if they're willing to do the work. I think therapy is for everybody, specifically for those that are willing to do the work. If you're not willing to do the work, then therapy is not going to work for you. It's not for you. Therapy, let me backtrack. Therapy is for people that are willing to do the work. And if you're willing to do the work, I'm confident that you'll be able to get the answers that you're looking for. And we need to have these conversations. And this is why platforms like this is really important. So again, going back to mental health, what it is, we discussed, the components of mental health, which includes emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So I want to take a moment to kind of break down each of these. So when we talk about emotional well-being, the ability to manage and express emotions appropriately and to cope with life's challenges is a widely accepted part of mental health. For your emotional well-being to be on point, you have to be able to manage your emotions. Like, we are emotional beings. That's just how we are. Whether you want to admit it or not, we got emotions. And sometimes these emotions are going to come out. Whether you're sad, happy, angry, frustrated, disappointed, guilty. We are made up with a variety of emotions. And I do believe that emotions are given to us for a reason. Now, the trick is being able to identify what that emotion is, and then being able to assess what to do with that emotion once you figure out what it is and what needs to get done. And, we could think of many different examples of people who are able to exercise their decision-making based on their emotional well-being. Like I said before, if you're in a good place, then chances are you're going to make good decisions. If you're not in a good place in terms of your mental health, then chances are you're not going to make the best of decisions at that point in time. So it's really important that people really take the time to focus on their emotional well-being, because it is a huge part of your mental health overall. So again, emotional well-being is central to mental health, especially the frameworks that were developed by mental health professionals to explain psychology and to explain overall health. And you have a lot of organizations that will reference these frameworks to kind of help promote that. So the next part about mental health, as I mentioned before, psychological well-being. This component really encompasses mental processes such as thinking, decision making, and maintaining a sense of purpose, all of which are crucial to mental health, as defined by the World Health Organization and other mental health authorities. So your ability to think, your ability to make decisions, anything pertaining to processes that your brain undergoes, this is what we're referring to as psychological well-being. And again, the nature or the quality of your capacity and ability to do these things is dependent upon the quality of your mental health. And in this case, we're talking about your psychological well-being. And then lastly, when talking about social well-being, this refers to the ability to form and maintain healthy relationships and effectively contribute to the community. So again, going back to the purpose of the show, which is to improve relationships with the self, with others, right? Which is really important. This somewhat speaks to the component of mental health in which we're referring to as social well-being. So this aspect of mental health has been highlighted in many studies and frameworks focusing on holistic mental health care. So when we talk about social well-being, this essentially refers to your relationship to other people and your ability and capacity to relate to other people. And again, the quality of these relationships, I would say, is in large part dependent upon the quality of your social well-being. So mental and physical health, another point that I think is really important to remember is that mental and physical health are equally important components of overall health. So when we talk about health, a lot of times tend to just think about your physical health, right? Which is very important, right? We don't want to negate that. Like, I'm still working on this dad bod, you know what I mean? It ain't perfect, but you know, your boy's getting there. I'm getting a jump start on summer 2025. But we don't want to negate our mental health at the expense of our physical health. The two really does go hand in hand, right? We only get one body in this life, okay? And while it's easy to focus on the physical aspects of life in general, including our bodies, because this is what we see on a day-to-day basis, anytime you look into the mirror, or even just like, you know, just knowing that your body exists, you can kind of tell when your physical health isn't where it's supposed to be. But it's not quite as obvious with respect to mental health because of the fact that we can't see it, right? We can feel it, we can think it, but because it's not tangible in the sense that you can, you know, touch your thoughts or hold on to them and things of that sort, I think it's really easy for people to kind of not regard it as something as important to take care of. But I think people are starting to catch on to the fact that it is just as important. So when we talk about health, it's not just physical health, we're also talking about mental health, which is just as important. So for example, when we talk about depression, right? You know, many people are familiar with what depression is. Depression increases the risk for many types of physical health problems, particularly long-lasting conditions like diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. And similarly, the presence of chronic conditions can increase the risk for mental illness, right? So if you're dealing with a chronic issue such as, you know, heart disease, which a lot of that is brought on by stress, right? Whatever those stressful things that are taking place in your life that you haven't addressed ultimately will have an impact on your mental health. So if you don't address it, you know, these problems aren't going to go away. The stress isn't going to go away, which really just places greater emphasis on the need for people to take initiative to address that and making sure that their health, physical and mental, is on point. So good mental health really does enhance the quality of life, you know, which allows people to enjoy activities, maintain fulfilling relationships, and achieve personal and professional goals. Without being in a good place mentally, I don't believe that we can truly reach our full potential and be able to get the things that we want to get in life, because being bogged down, I would say mentally, is very debilitating. I mean, I'm sure that many of us, if not all of us, but I'll go as far as to say that all of us can probably attest to a time when we weren't at our best mentally, right, with respect to our mental health. And that can actually stop us from pursuing the things that we want to pursue. When you're stressed out, the last thing that a lot of times people don't want to do is get out of bed, especially if you're experiencing depressive episodes, or if you're suffering from depression, whether you've been clinically diagnosed with it or not. But when these negative experiences that impact us negatively from an emotional standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, from a social standpoint, if it's bad enough, it could really keep us from doing what it is that we need to do. So it really should be of no surprise that our quality of life is really dependent upon the quality of our mental health and our well-being. Also note that mental health affects productivity and performance, especially at work or school. It does enhance focus, creativity, and decision-making abilities, as I mentioned before. So if you want to live your best life, I would go as far as to say, make sure that you take care of your mental health. Make sure that you stay on top of it, because you don't want to cheat yourself out of these experiences that you deserve to have. And like I said, I'm going to make sure that I play my part in helping you all understand and know what it means and what it takes to achieve that portion of your life where you could be thriving. Because I believe that we all deserve that for ourselves, honestly and truthfully speaking. I can attest to times where, like I said, I wasn't at my best. And had I stayed in those places, mentally speaking, I would not have been able to accomplish the things that I've been able to accomplish up to date. And I'm thankful for all the things that I have in place to kind of help me get to that point. Shout out to my therapist, who's really helped me to get through some very tough times. And I think being a professional in this industry has really given me the cheat codes on how to handle that. But again, I'm not perfect. I'm human too. I really want people to understand that therapists are people too, okay? Yes, we might be the individual that you come to for advice, or not so much advice, because good therapists don't give advice, all right? If you don't remember anything else from this episode, please keep in mind that therapists do not give advice. What we do is help guide you in your process of achieving whatever your goal is in therapy. So keep that in mind. So we help you to think about the things that you might want to take into consideration that you haven't thought of before. We help you in your process of connecting the dots so you can kind of have that eureka moment, that light bulb going off moment where that transformative change actually does happen in your life. And we're just along for the ride. Like, we don't got all the answers, like I mentioned before, because we're not you. We're not living your life. I believe, let me personalize it. I believe that a lot of people actually know what to do. I believe that a lot of people know the answers that they're looking for. They're just not aware of it in the moment. So my role as a mental health advocate, as a mental health professional, especially being a licensed therapist, is to help you reach that level of awareness. And once that does happen, I think that's when life really does take off for you in a way that you could have never imagined. So this is one of the reasons why I'm really pushing for people to get the help that they need. So that right there is a brief overview of what mental health is and why it's important. Next, we want to go over some common mental health disorders. So some of these that I'm going to go over, I'm pretty sure a lot of you, if not all of you, are familiar with them or have heard of them in some degree or another before. In fact, some of these things might be conditions that you might be experiencing yourself, even at this moment. But for those of you who don't know, I'm going to go over 7 very common mental health disorders. And again, this is not the full list of mental health disorders that are out there. We got this book here, the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorders, which contains over 150 mental health disorders. Over 150. I'm just going over 7 of them. because we ain't got time to be going over on 150 plus disorders in this book. But this book is what we credentialed and licensed mental health professionals use to formally diagnose the clients that we see, which helps to bring about some clarity about what it is that people are dealing with. And I don't want people to think of a diagnosis as like this stamp or this label that you got to live with for the rest of your life. I mean, depending on what the disorder is, but just because some of these things are coming up for you doesn't mean that it has to limit you completely. I do believe that with the right help, with the right commitment, with the right resources and supports set in place, with the right system set in place as well, I do believe that a lot of the things that we're dealing with from a mental health standpoint can really be alleviated. So as long as we do the work, right? So let's go over some of these common mental health disorders. First off, we're going to talk about depression. So depression is characterized by persistent feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and a lack of interest or pleasure in daily activities. Some symptoms may include changes in sleep, appetite, energy level, and concentration. Depression is one of the most common mental health disorders worldwide, affecting millions of people. The World Health Organization reports that more than 280 million people of all ages suffer from depression globally. Now, if you know what depression feels like, it is no joke. All right. Depression is no joke. I've had my bouts of it myself, several times. I could think of, very prominent instances in my life where I had to deal with that. It is not fun. It is not a good experience at all to deal with. And again, keep in mind that any of the information that I share in this podcast is not meant to be diagnostic at all. So don't think because in your mind you're checking off all these boxes that I'm listing off of what may show up as a particular disorder means that you have it. No, make sure that you check in with a licensed professional to get formally diagnosed and evaluated so that you can get the support that you need. But depression is a very common thing that a lot of people experience. Like I mentioned, it's very debilitating. You feel like you're in a really dark place. You really don't feel like doing much, if at all. I'm glad to be at a place now where that's not something that I'm currently dealing with. At least I don't think I am. And that's the thing too. Like a lot of times with these disorders, you don't even realize that you might be dealing with that particular thing. Which is why, it's important that we tap in with other people to kind of point us in the right direction. I think this is one of the reasons why it's important to have the right people around you. They might be able to point out some things in you that you may not even be aware of. So we have to be honest with ourselves about what it is that we're experiencing, what it is that we're feeling, what it is that we're thinking. Because the more that we kind of lie to ourselves about what it is that we're experiencing, I think we're actually robbing ourselves, again, of the opportunities and the type of life that we ought to live. And there really shouldn't be any shame around experiencing these things that we're talking about here with respect to these disorders. And a little bit later, we're going to talk about these stigmas and myths and misconceptions about mental health. But a depression, again, is just one of those things that a lot of people are experiencing. And people really owe it to themselves to get the help that they need so that they can get out of it. What I've noticed with people suffering from depression or who are experiencing depressive symptoms, and I put myself in that category too, like I said, because I've experienced it. A lot of it is really perpetuated by, and when I say it, I'm talking about what we experience, while going through depression. A lot of it is really perpetuated, or it's, kind of fed by the thoughts that we come up with and invalidated feelings, right? One of the key things in highlighting depression is like that sense of hopelessness. And when we don't feel like there is a way out when we don't feel like or can't see that light at the end of the tunnel, it's really hard to kind of get over, or to get through, I should say, because getting over kind of, makes it seem like it's a simple thing that can be done, or like all you got to do is just think happy thoughts. Like, no, depression doesn't work that way. But when you invalidate your feelings, when you invalidate your thoughts, or when you invalidate the thoughts and feelings of other people who are going through it, it just kind of digs them, or digs you into a deeper hole. I think that's probably one of the best ways to describe, being depressed and what that feeling is like. It's kind of like you're in a hole that you can't get out of, or that you're having a really hard time getting out of. And what people need is a lifeline. Somebody needs, whoever's going through that depressive moment or who is dealing with depression just needs a rope to be thrown down to them while they're in that hole. And if they don't see it, or don't think that it's ever coming, then it's a really, really tough place to be at. So if you know of anyone that is experiencing depressive symptoms, I highly encourage you to get the help, or point somebody in the right direction to get it. And again, if you are looking for further assistance, I'd be more than happy to point you in the right direction too. I have a plethora of resources that I can connect you with, and making sure that you get the help that you need. Another common mental health disorder, after going over depression, anxiety disorders. Now, anxiety disorders is another thing that's very common. I'm sure many people, if not all people, have experienced anxiety to some degree or another. I'll keep it a buck with you. Even starting this podcast, there was some sense of anxiousness that came up. But just because you're feeling anxious does not necessarily mean that you have an anxiety disorder. Again, a lot of the symptoms that we experience, especially when we go over some of these common disorders, the symptoms in and of itself does not mean that you have the disorder. Like I said, feeling depressed is very common. So those moments of feeling sad, those moments of feeling hopeless, that is a very common thing. What really classifies something as a disorder is when you are experiencing these things on a consistent basis, and these symptoms are very persistent and they last a while, and it's actually getting in the way of you doing what you normally would be doing on a day-to-day basis. If it's impacting you in that way, then we might be treading the line of perhaps experiencing a disorder. But again, you won't know for sure unless you get evaluated and actually met with a licensed and credentialed mental health professional to let you know. So in the same sense, anxiety, if you're feeling anxiousness, if you're feeling nervous, it's a very common thing depending on the situation, right? But if you're experiencing conditions such as that on a very persistent basis, then we might be dealing with something that's more severe. So anxiety disorders encompass conditions characterized by excessive worry, fear, or nervousness. Common types include generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and social anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental health disorders in the U.S., affecting around 40 million adults, which is approximately over 18% of the U.S. population. So 40 million people is a lot. That is a lot. The National Institute of Mental Health notes that anxiety disorders are highly treatable, yet often go untreated. And why are they going untreated? Because a lot of people are not getting the help that they need, whether because they don't want to admit that they need the help, or there are a lot of barriers preventing that person from getting the help that they need, which is a whole nother conversation, which we'll get into at some other time. But essentially, that's what we're talking about when we talk about anxiety disorders. Bipolar disorder is another one that many people may be familiar with. When we talk about bipolar disorder, it's marked by extreme mood swings, including emotional highs and lows, also referred to as mania or hypomania or depression. These shifts can affect energy, activity levels, and the ability to carry out daily tasks. About 2.8% of U.S. adults are diagnosed with bipolar disorder in a given year. The National Institute of Mental Health also describes bipolar disorder as a lifelong condition that can be managed with proper treatment. So the plus side to a lot of these disorders, as just mentioned, is that there is treatment for it, right? And the degree in which we're actually able to progress in our treatment really does depend on one's capacity and commitment to sticking with the treatment, right? So it's kind of like working out. You want to lose weight or you want to gain weight, whatever your goals are, don't think that you can accomplish it by working out 15 minutes once a week and think that you can eat 4 cheeseburgers a night trying to maintain your weight, trying to maintain your health. Like, that's not going to happen. You can say, oh, well, I walked for 15 minutes today. Well, yeah, but you also consume like 3,000 calories. Like, that, like, what are we doing? You know what I mean? In the same sense, when it comes down to treatment, we want to make sure that we're staying on top of that and that we're staying consistent too, right? So by being able to do that, then we can actually see improvements in our mental health, regardless of the condition that you're dealing with, even if you are dealing with something that you may be battling with for the rest of your life. But just because you might be in that battle, again, does not necessarily mean that you have to succumb to that disorder and be defeated. You don't have to. And you don't have to deal with this alone, which is why it's important that you reach out to others. Schizophrenia is another common mental health disorder that many people are familiar with. This is characterized by distortions in thinking, perception, emotions, language, sense of self, and behavior. This includes symptoms of delusions, hallucinations, and disorganized speech or behavior. Schizophrenia affects around 1% of the global population, and the World Health Organization classifies schizophrenia as a severe mental health disorder that typically emerges in late adolescence or early adulthood. Just moving right along, post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, again, another very common one that people are very familiar with. This occurs after experiencing or witnessing a very traumatic event, such as violence, disaster, or a serious accident. Symptoms include flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, and uncontrollable thoughts about the event. So when you're constantly thinking or having negative thoughts about something, this is what we will call rumination, right? So if you find yourself constantly ruminating on this event or what transpired, then that is a symptom of experiencing post-traumatic stress, in this case, which is a very common and very severe disorder, which does impact about 3.6% of adults in the US on an annual basis. The American Psychiatric Association says that PTSD can develop in people of any age. So children can experience PTSD, teenagers can experience PTSD, adults can experience PTSD of all ages at that. Trauma has no age limit. I think that's really the best way to put it. Coming up in my career, especially in my education, in social work and becoming a therapist, I remember one of the things that they taught me in grad school was that operate from the assumption that every single person that you come across has experienced some type of traumatic event. And I remember when my professor said that to me at the time, I was just like, what? That's crazy. Like, who? And I don't mean crazy in a derogatory sense, but that's wild. Like, everybody? Because I'm even thinking about on a personal sense, I haven't experienced any trauma. But then again, knowing how the brain works, a lot of times we end up repressing things or suppressing things that we're not quite aware of. And it's not until these things are kind of brought to the forefront of our minds, we don't realize the impact that some of the things that we've been through has actually impacted us in a huge way. So when you experience a very significant event, negative event, like I mentioned before, whether it's weather related, whether it has to do with violence of some sort, or an accident that caused serious harm to yourself or other people, that is very traumatic. That is very traumatic. So I am of the mindset, even just based on things that I was taught in grad school, that whoever I see or whoever I come across, particularly in session, I'm not going around in my life, wondering what trauma has every single person that I see, what have they gone through. I don't have the capacity to do that. At some point, I got to turn my brain off. I turn my brain off in that sense when I'm not in therapy. Naturally speaking, I'm always wondering, what happened to people. I've always been curious and inquisitive and intuitive in that sense. Always been interested in human behavior. I think that's partly the reason why I got into this profession in the first place, and have always been interested in psychology. But as curious and as interested as I'm in with respect to human behavior and like what people are thinking and wondering about their life stories and why they do the things that they do, I have a limit. There's only so much of that I can take. And for those of you who know, especially those therapists out there, my fellow therapists out there, at some point you got to turn it off because it's overwhelming. It's a lot. It is a lot. I do therapy part-time in terms of the sessions that I facilitate. It's not a full-time job for me yet. But even with that being said, with the people that I see, it's a very taxing job. It's people in professions such as this are very much prone to burnout. We're prone to something called secondhand or secondary post-traumatic stress. And if that goes unchecked, then that can easily escalate to something bigger. But with respect to trauma, I can't constantly think about what other people's stories are. But if you're a client of mine and you're coming in, that's usually one of the first things that I'm thinking about is, what is your story? Like, what happened to you to get you to see me? And how do we leverage and use that information to get you to where you want to be at? You know what I mean? And the whole process of like actually unpacking, these traumas and these experiences that we've gone through is not the easiest thing to do. It's not a pleasant experience to have to go through. Many people don't want to go through it. Many people are just not ready to go through it. And understandably so, because things are going to come up but that you kind of just wish you would never have to think about or talk about ever again. But if we really want to get to that place in life that we want to get to, it takes courage to get to that point where you want to address some of these things that has happened. But if it goes unchecked, then you're going to experience a lot of these symptoms that we're talking about here. So that's essentially what post-traumatic stress disorder, and again, we'll have plenty of opportunities to get deeper into some of these common mental health disorders and other ones that I haven't even mentioned in this episode. But again, if you have any questions about something that's come to mind for you, anything that you're hearing that you have more questions on or more thoughts on, feel free to reach out to me and we can definitely get into that. Another common mental health disorder, which a lot of people are very familiar with this, and I think people use this term very loosely, and I get it and I understand why, and I've definitely been guilty of doing this too. But having worked in this profession as a therapist, I take this a lot more seriously now and don't use it as loosely as many people do, but I understand what people mean when they say it. So when people talk about being OCD, what we're really talking about is a disorder characterized by unwanted recurring thoughts or obsessions and or repetitive behaviors, which we will call compulsions, right? So obsessive compulsive disorder is what OCD is. Unwanted recurring thoughts or obsessions and or repetitive behaviors, which we will call compulsions. So when we talk about compulsions, this can show up in a variety of different ways. So oftentimes when people talk about OCD, people talk about cleanliness, right? They don't like being in dirty places. The idea of thought of germs just like trips them up, like it freaks them out. So a compulsion in that sense would be hand washing. People would wash their hands if they touch air. If they could, they would. Like the minute they come in contact with public, like they are itching to find the biggest bottle of hand sanitizer that they can keep on hand. And, they want to make sure that they don't come in contact with anything. So hand washing comes into account. People with OCD engage in what we would call as rituals to kind of help keep things in order in their minds, because control, I would say, is a huge part of somebody being able to feel regulated if they are experiencing OCD, or if they're, if they've been diagnosed with OCD. So one way in which that they kind of keep things in order is by counting, right? So rituals are kind of like repetitive patterns that somebody engages in to kind of keep themselves at bay. So what I've experienced in working with people who think that they have OCD, and I say it that way because I noticed that a lot of people that I've worked with that claim that they have OCD really don't. I mean, they exhibit some of these symptoms that I could understand why they might think that they have it. And in some cases, they've actually worked with other mental health professionals that formally diagnosed them with it. But after doing some work with them, I came to find out that, yes, you might worry about this thing, but it doesn't seem like it's really impeding upon your daily activities. Like, it's really not getting in the way of you doing what you normally would do or have a responsibility to do. May you engage in these things perhaps more than, some people? Perhaps. Is it OCD-like? Perhaps, But a lot of times, again, in my professional experience, I wouldn't necessarily diagnose, the people that I've worked with OCD, which then actually helps them to kind of like feel this sense of relief, like, oh, maybe I don't have it, and, then they're not tripping about it as much anymore, which to me is like, I love knowing that I can help people get to a point where they feel like they've regained control of themselves, and that light bulb goes off when they realize that I am not limited by this. I don't have to live by this anymore. Because again, a lot of these things are really perpetuated by a variety of different things, society, people, news, media, what have you, especially social media. But that's a different topic for another day. But we end up perpetuating these things ourselves just based off of what we think and how we feel. And unless we correct these thinkings, these thoughts that we have, then it's only going to get worse. And then you're really just confirming what it is that you've already believed, and then you're going to continue engaging in some of these behaviors, where if you're provided with an alternative way of thinking, if you're provided with strategies in which that you can kind of, right the ship, so to speak, then, you'll regain that power. You'll regain that control over yourself and feel empowered to want to do better, which is, I would say, my goal in the work that I do with people, regardless of whether I'm doing therapy or if I'm, sharing information with people. My gift is to educate and empower people, maybe entertain in some degree. But really, I feel like I'm called and led to educate and empower people. And that's what I do in my sessions, because seeing people walk out or exit, in a virtual sense, sessions with me with their heads held high, back straight, feeling like, talk to me nice, I'm out here. I love that feeling. I love seeing people thrive in that sense. So getting back into, talking about OCD, it's been reported that 1.2% of U.S. adults experience OCD in a given year. And the Anxiety and Depression Association of America notes that OCD can interfere significantly with a person's daily life. So like I said, disorders do just that. They interfere with your daily life. So if you find that any of these things that you've been experiencing are actually impeding upon your day-to-day, I would highly recommend that you reach out to somebody and get the help that you need. Last but not least, of the common mental health disorders, eating disorders. Eating disorders involve abnormal eating habits and severe concern with body weight or shape. Common disorders include anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. Eating disorders are, like I said, very common. Perhaps, somebody that's experiencing it. You may be experiencing it yourself. It's a lot deeper than just like having cravings all the time. No. I believe that a lot of the symptoms that people experience with respect to any disorder is not the main issue to address. A lot of these disorders are really stemming from something deeper internally that needs to get addressed, right? And until we actually get to a point where we can figure out what that thing is at the core that needs to get addressed, then we're going to see these symptoms continue to play out. So when we talk about eating disorders like the ones that I just mentioned, people think that it's about like dieting, or it's about, it's about food intake or getting rid of food, depending on the nature of the eating disorder that one might be experiencing. But it's really addressing the thing that's driving people to want to engage in these behaviors in the first place. So until we get to that, then we're really not going to see improvements in these areas that people want to see improvements in. So in terms of prevalence, eating disorders actually affect approximately 9% of the global population. The National Eating Disorders Association highlights that these disorders have the highest mortality rate of mental illness, which is very surprising because people actually wouldn't think about that. But if you give it some further thought, even as I'm thinking about this right now, a lot of disorders are actually combined with other ones. So the first one that can come to mind for me with somebody who might be experiencing an eating disorder is that people may also be experiencing depressive symptoms, or may actually be diagnosed with some type of depressive disorder. So what comes with that could be a whole host of things, where people are self-harming themselves in a variety of different ways. So when hearing or reading the fact that eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness, unfortunately, I'm not that surprised. But where else would you get that information? If you didn't know where to look, if you didn't know where to check that out. So this is the reason why conversations like this are really important. Now, I don't mean to sound very morbid, but I do believe that to drive the conversation about mental health requires that we uncover some things that are not being uncovered. It means having to have the difficult conversations about these things so that we can actually take that first step in being able to address it in the way that needs to be addressed, which is, again, why I really do appreciate, other platforms, other entities that are taking the initiative to talk about mental health and raise the awareness about mental health. But we got to make sure that we're going about it in a way that is actually benefiting people. I think one of the reasons why I felt pushed to go into podcasting specifically is because I come across a lot of mediums, a lot of podcasts, a lot of different forums by people who are just not credentialed to say the things that they're saying. And just as much as we can use our platforms, our respective, platforms and medias as a tool to help, unfortunately, misinformation on these things can also be used as a weapon to do more harm. And I'm going to make sure that I play my part in making sure that I don't perpetuate that. So I want to make sure that I'm giving you all, very valid information, very credible information to kind of raise your awareness and improve our education as a whole, our education, because I'm still learning. I may have reached the mountaintop when it comes to, this profession and whatnot, but I would be naive and arrogant to say that I know it all when I really don't. So this is a learning experience for all of us, but I'm actually taking on the charge to lead this conversation, in this way on my platform, in a way that I hope that you all can benefit from it. So with that being said, that covers the common mental health disorders that people are aware of. So we've already gone over what mental health is, why it's important, some of the common mental health disorders that are out there. And then I guess to carry on in that conversation, in that sense, I want to go over some of the common stigmas and myths about mental health. So let's discuss some of these common misconceptions that are out there and some of the negative connotations around mental health, right? So there are about 10 misconceptions that I want to go over that are seemingly very common and prevalent, that people have about mental health that needs to get cleared up. And I think it's important that we do that. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So the first misconception is that mental health issues are not real issues, which is really one of the furthest things from the truth. Mental health issues are in fact very real, and it's all around us. If you think it's not real, you need to get your eyes checked. I don't know where you're living at. Perhaps you're living in this place where you got none of that stuff going on. You know what I mean? Everybody's perfect. Everybody's good. Everybody's in a great place. The only place I can think of that's like that is heaven. And I think that we're not there yet. So if you are in that place, send me the address. You know what I mean? Send me the link. Let me know where that's at. But I know for a fact that mental health issues are all around us, and it's very real. So mental health issues are very legitimate, very legitimate medical conditions that does require treatment. And like I mentioned before, they're very debilitating, just as debilitating as physical illnesses, and are recognized by medical professionals worldwide. Now, people might think that, because it's mental, like you really can't feel it. That's nonsense. A good example I can give of that, and we kind of talked about this already, is like depression, right? So when we talk about depression, again, those of you, if you know, you know. If you've been depressed, and I'm not saying that you had to have been, clinically diagnosed with depression, but if you experience symptoms of depression, that, man, a good example that I think a lot of us can relate to, if you ever been through a heartbreak, Lord, Jesus. Oh, Lord. Heartbreak, man, listen. That right there, heartbreak is no joke, man. That is no joke. And I'm not afraid to admit it. I've gone through it. I'm sure many of you have gone through it. If you haven't gone through it, brace yourself. I say it jokingly, but I do believe that with the right support in place, amongst a host of other things, if you're able to get through it, or when you're able to get through it, I'm going to speak some positivity out there. When you're able to get through it, you'll come out on the other end of that healing process much stronger, much wiser. But again, you have to have the right systems, the right supports in place in order to get through that. But when you're going through it in that moment, oh Lord, I remember, well, I'm not going to get into details about my heartbreak, but your boy is healed, or I should say healing. Healing, I should add this point. And one of my mans had said this, shout out to Terrell, my boy Terrell. He said something to me that I thought was really profound, and I think he learned this in his own therapy sessions, is that healing is not a destination, it's a journey, right? I don't think that we can ever get to a place where we can finally say, I am healed from this. Because healing, like I said, it's a journey. It's an ongoing process. And we're all constantly going through this journey of healing, because a lot of times people will assume that we've healed from something until we've actually faced something that can remind us of the thing that we've healed from. And then we're right back at square one again with respect to the thoughts and the feelings associated with that thing. So I think being exposed to, some of these things that trigger us, right, which is exactly what that is, experiencing something that reminds you of a past event that resurfaces feelings and thoughts that you've experienced. It's really hard to deal with a lot of times. And so when we're talking about heartbreak, when I've gone through it, I know like exactly where I feel stress. Like if I feel stress, I feel it in my chest, I feel it in my shoulders, my whole body gets tense. Other physical, symptoms I would experience is like my digestive system will shut down, which is typically biologically what will happen when we experience stress. Like your brain sends out these chemicals that will tell your body, all right, eating is of the least importance right now. We are in duress right now. Like, shut everything down. And when I say everything, specifically what I'm referring to is your digestive system. which is why a lot of times people will lose their appetite when they're stressed, right? Because your body is saying, listen, food is like the last thing I need right now. All right. So if your body is sending that message, or your brain is sending that message to your body, essentially that's going to shut down. The last thing that you want to do is eat. So in some cases, some people handle stress very differently. So when stress eating comes about, it really has nothing to do with you being hungry, right? You're not eating for the purpose of sustaining yourself. You're really eating as a coping mechanism, which is totally different. So when we don't have ways in which that we can cope with a stressful event, then this is when disorders really do come about. And there's like a whole breakdown that I can get into another time about how that actually happens. But yeah, man, for me, I know like I'll have these moments where, I lose my appetite. I'm not eating. So I kind of like feel that. I'll feel the tenseness in, different parts of my body. My chest is hurting, it's tight. My breathing changes. I could feel like my heart rate accelerating. One thing in particular that happens with me, or that has happened with me in the past, especially like if I've experienced heartbreak, is I tend to feel it here. Like I'll feel it in my head. Like it's gotten so bad to the point where I legit thought I was gonna have a brain aneurysm. Like I really did think that. Like the pain and the pressure that I was experiencing was that tense. And thankfully, I've had the wherewithal to do some additional research and understanding why that may be the case, because when you're stressed out, your body releases cortisol, and cortisol impacts the body in many, many different ways. In addition to that, feeling like that sense of brain fog, something that I've experienced. But I think the reason why for me, I think I'm giving out too much of my business, but we're family here. We're going to be transparent. Transparency is a core value of mine. And I think for the work to really be done, I think that we have to be transparent with one another. But I ain't going to give you all my business, but I'll lead by example and be as transparent as I can. For me, experiencing that level of hurt would debilitate me in that sense, where I tend to experience everything here. I remember in grad school, my professor had pointed out to me that I'm very cerebral. And she mentioned that because of a paper that I wrote one time. And she was trying to challenge me to kind of get deeper into, I guess, something I was talking about in my paper, which, she didn't say it was a bad thing at all. I think she really appreciated that. And I appreciate her even, pointing that out, because, that was something that really stuck with me for a long time. And the fact that I am cerebral, I think, kind of translated into other things, where I found out in therapy that I intellectualize my emotions. I intellectualize my feelings, which means that at one point in time, I would avoid actually feeling and experiencing whatever it is that I'm feeling in that moment. So instead of actually like sitting with the feeling, what I would tend to do is actually try to process it all up here, which there's nothing wrong with doing that. I think it's a very effective tactic in improving your emotional health, your emotional well-being. I think the first step in being able to manage your thoughts and your emotions is to be able to identify what's going on, and then being able to know what to do with that information. But for me, it was just stuck on identifying and coming up with a plan on how to address this without having to feel the emotions and the feelings that I'm experiencing. And I think that's due to a variety of different reasons. I named the fact that I am a man, and I do believe that men and women do handle things differently, more so because of how we've been socially constructed, and the things that we've been exposed to from an early age, and like how we process things. So I do name that, which is probably why I tend to intellectualize things a lot. But, I've been improving. I've been working on it. Again, shout out to my therapist. But because I keep everything up here, the tension stays up here for me too. And then at some point, it ends up manifesting itself into physical sensations that I can actually feel. Like I said, the tightness and whatever aches I might be feeling in my head, might be in the form of a headache. I never experienced a migraine, thank God, because I hear about people that go through them and it is not pretty. But I experience it in that sense. So that's my explanation as to why I might think that I experience, stress in that sense, there. But I say all of that which is a very long story, I guess. But I say all of that to say that the things that we experience mentally with respect to our mental health issues are just as legitimate as things that, and are just as debilitating as the things that we experience on a physical level. And a lot of times we're going to experience these things, hand in hand. So mental health issues are very much real. So that debunks this whole misconception that mental health issues are not real illnesses when they are. Another misconception is that mental health problems are a sign of weakness. The reality is that mental health issues can affect anyone. Mental health does not discriminate at all. You have children who are experiencing mental health issues, as I mentioned before. You got teens that are experiencing it. You have babies that are experiencing it. You have adults that are experiencing it, young adults, middle-aged adults, our senior citizens. And that's just a fact. There is no age limit to mental health. It does not discriminate. Much like how any illness really doesn't discriminate. You hear people of all ages getting cancer. You hear people of all ages experiencing very serious and chronic diseases and conditions. So knowing that it doesn't discriminate, it can affect anybody. And regardless of how strong you are, regardless of, who it is that you believe that you are, your sense of identity, your character, no matter, how much willpower you have, mental health can touch anybody, right? But there's this misconception that if you have a mental illness, then that means that you're a weak person. And I believe that that's not quite the case, You don't have to be, like I mentioned before, limited or stuck with this label of whatever it is that you might be experiencing, You can associate with this but still be thriving, you know what I mean? So this misconception that mental health problems are a sign of weakness, these issues tend to arise from a combination of genetic, biological, environmental, and psychological factors, a lot of which are things that are outside of our control. But if we learn to control the things that do fall within our realm of control, right, then I think that we can really make something positive happen. And that's where the transformative work comes into play. So part of being able to do better and to be better is, I think, to understand and be honest about areas that you're struggling with or areas that you're struggling in. And once you're able to do that, then you can come up with a plan as to how we can get through this and identify and highlight some of the things that we are actually strong in, right? So that we can still coexist with the thing that we're struggling with. You know what I mean? I think that this also warrants a conversation, which, we're going to have this on another episode, but around the conversation, particularly around men and mental health. Now, there are a couple areas that I'm very much so interested in with respect to mental health and how I kind of incorporate that into my practice. And generally speaking, I assist, for the most part, adults. I have worked with kids. The youngest I'd actually work with are teenagers. But not growing up, but when I first started out in this profession as a case manager, I've worked with children as young as 9 years old that were exhibiting, mental health issues as a case manager, not as a clinician. When I was in grad school, during my internship, I did work with children. Some might have been even younger than 9. I think I worked with a 5-year-old. And that form of therapy at that point in time that I was engaging in was called play therapy. So children love to play. That's really a universal language for a lot of kids. They experience a lot of things through play. They learn through play. They develop, their brains through play, and being able to do that, I think that was it was an eye-opening experience in understanding and seeing firsthand that yes, even kids can go through something, with respect to their mental health. It's just a matter of finding a way to connect with them and being able to help them out in that regard. But once we're able to do that, then I think that we can really change the course in which somebody grows up and how they experience certain things. So starting out in case management, I've worked with some children, but now I think I'm really starting to lean towards working more so with adults around the issues and areas of, depression, anxiety, some of the, common mental health disorders that I mentioned before. Couples, I'm really getting into couples work. I love it. It's interesting to me. It's interesting. Being able to sit and watch dynamics between people is really cool. And I'll be honest, the TBT and I've witnessed some things in couples therapy that definitely deserves a documentary. But I am legally obligated to keep the confidentiality of the things that are discussed in my sessions, so as to not give away identities and things of that sort. But couples therapy is very interesting, so I'm really starting to get into that work, and this is really to bring home the point that I want to make. Working with men, there's men in mental health. I think is an area that I believe is starting to open up a lot more now, which I'm glad to see and I'm really grateful to see. And we need to have more of these conversations, and being in a position where I can assist men, which I am now. I would say maybe over 50% of my client base are men who are seeking therapy for a variety of different reasons. But the idea that men are seeking therapy, one of the misconceptions is that, like I just mentioned, mental health problems are a sign of weakness. So if you are to admit that you have a mental health issue, it is believed to be that you are weak, right? And for men in particular, I know that this is the case for women as well, but speaking as a man, having worked with men, also being a man who has been in therapy for about 6 years, I think, or has been 6 years. I understand. I get it. I know that this misconception exists, and that is the furthest thing from the truth. I think, again, one of the most courageous things that you can do is admit the fact that, you need help. And I think personally that this is a sign of strength more than it is a weakness, because to have courage, I believe, is a strength in and of itself. So if you have the courage to even admit the fact that you need help, to me, that's a signal of strength right there, not weakness. So the idea that mental health problems are a sign of weakness, I don't believe that at all. Next up, another misconception, people with mental health issues are dangerous or violent. The reality is that the majority of people with mental health conditions are not violent. They are more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators themselves. Most individuals with mental health issues lead normal, productive lives. So yes, we can think of many different examples of people who have mental health conditions that have committed acts of violence. But again, this is why we talk about the importance of checking our sources and being mindful about the information that we're taking on and that we're consuming, is that it's really easy to perpetuate this fact, or this, not fact, but this idea that if you have a mental health disorder, if you have a mental health condition, then you're a violent person. And it's like, yeah, you'll see examples of that, but that's not for the majority of people who are dealing with a mental health condition. So the fact that most people with mental health issues are dangerous or violent just is not true. Another misconception, mental health problems are rare. As we already discussed, a lot of these mental health conditions that we discussed are very common. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 4 people will be affected by mental or neurological disorders at some point in their lives. That's 25% of people, which is significant. I would say that is very significant. So for every 4 people that you see, one of them will be affected by a mental health or a neurological disorder at some point in their life. So to think that it's rare, that it can't happen to you, or it doesn't really happen to people like that, that is just not true at all. Another one, you can just snap out of mental health issues. Again, that's false. Mental health conditions cannot be overcome simply by trying harder or thinking positively. I said this before, right? Like even with respect to depression, people would say like, oh, well, just think happy thoughts, or stop thinking about that thing that's bothering you. And then I think for people who are on the receiving end of something like that, I could only imagine the thoughts that are going through their head when somebody tells them something like that. Like, you think if I knew that, I would have done that already? Like, if I knew that would have been the solution to my problems, you don't think I would have done that already? So I don't fault people for feeling like smacking somebody when somebody tells them to do something like that, say if they are experiencing a depressive episode or depressive symptoms. But it's not that easy. It's not that easy. A lot of times you can't just snap out of it. A lot of these things that we're dealing with does require intentional and consistent pursuit of support and help from those that are capable of providing that level of support. So understanding that mental health conditions cannot be overcome just by thinking, or trying harder or thinking positively. They often do require professional treatment, which does include therapy. In some cases, it does include, medication. I have my own personal views about medication that we can get into another time. But I do believe that there is a time and place for medication in this regard. And even sometimes a combination of both. I do believe that it does go hand in hand. So we really can't just snap out of it a lot of times. Sometimes it does require a greater level of care. Another misconception about mental health: seeking help for mental health issues means that you are crazy. So the more I kind of got into this profession, the more sensitive I became to the term crazy. Now, I know earlier, the word kind of slipped out, and then I backtracked, and I caught myself really quickly to, kind of negate that, because crazy is a connotation that's been applied to a lot of people for expressing themselves, and a lot of times can really really inappropriately label somebody as something that they're not. So the idea that seeking mental health issues means that you're crazy, that's just not the case. Sometimes you just need somebody to talk to. I have a number of people that I see in my practice. They don't really have like a major thing that they're dealing with. Perhaps at some point we may have discussed like major things that may have come up, but a majority of the people that I see, like, they have a central issue that they want to address, and then we spend a majority of our sessions talking about that thing. I do have some clients that really just come in and they just want somebody to talk to. Like, they will pay money and spend 45 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer, if I have the time to allot and give to them, to really just talk about life, just talk about their day, to talk about, sports and music, or their kids, or their marriage, or, what they did over the weekend. And, I can make a session just out of anything. Like, if you're going to see me, we're going to work for these 45 minutes. But it doesn't have to be like extensive. It doesn't mean that, you're going to be crying during, every session. Nah, sometimes we just shoot the breeze. And that in and of itself is very therapeutic for some people, because sometimes that's just what they need. So that doesn't mean that you're crazy. Like I mentioned before, like we're social beings, we are emotional beings. And because we have this innate desire to want to connect with people, the need to just like want to talk to people doesn't necessarily mean that you're crazy. Just because you're dealing with something that you're having a hard time with doesn't mean that you're crazy. You're just being human. You just want somebody to talk to. And I take pride in being able to be available to people in that regard, where they can have and utilize this outlet, whether it's sessions with me, sessions with somebody else. They got family members, they got friends, or what have you, or they engage in different activities as an outlet to kind of alleviate some of these things that they're dealing with to feel better and to do better. So no, seeking mental health does not mean that you're crazy. Seeking help is a sign of strength and self-awareness. It shows a commitment to one's well-being and a willingness to take steps towards recovery. I can't knock anybody that's taking steps to better themselves. I can't. And I don't think anybody should either. So if you are thinking about seeing somebody, again, just understand that you are taking a step towards bettering yourself. And to exercise that level of vulnerability requires a great deal of courage. And anybody that's willing to exercise courage, I believe, is exercising strength. So you're strong for wanting to do that. So if you needed a little push, a little confirmation to, make that happen, take that as that push and go get the help that you need. Another misconception is that therapy is only for people with severe mental health problems. Like I said, I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the point that I just made about, the fact that seeking help for mental health issues means that you're crazy, which is not the case. Therapy is not just for people with severe mental health problems. Like I said, I got people who come to see me on a weekly basis. I think one in particular I'm thinking about right now. I've been working with him for like 2 years. We essentially have the same conversation every week. Every now and again, something new will come up that, I can, leverage and use that as a way to kind of dive deeper into the work that needs to get done. But, 2 years and, seemingly on the surface level, it seems like we're just talking about day-to-day stuff and the family and whatnot. But I do believe at a deeper level, something is taking place that is helping him out, which is why, they keep on coming back. So no, therapy is not just for people with severe mental health problems. Therapy can benefit anyone. Like I said, if you're willing to do the work, I do believe that you can benefit from therapy. This can benefit anyone, including those dealing with everyday stress, life transitions, relationship issues. Lord knows people need help with that. Or challenges that people are experiencing with respect to personal growth. It is not reserved solely for severe conditions. So if you just want somebody to talk to and you don't think that, your parents are quite cutting it, your friends are, doing what they need to do to kind of be there for you, provide the level of support that you're looking for, find yourself somebody, get yourself a professional, that can help you. We are more than willing to do that. And finding the right therapist, I just want to say this, can be work sometimes. You want to find the right person for you. It's almost like dating in a sense. You don't want to just go with anybody. You want to find somebody that is the right fit. Sometimes that might take a little elbow grease to kind of find that right person. But when you do, and you really connect with that therapist, man, a whole lot could really come from that. So really encourage people to do that. Another misconception about mental health and medication for mental health conditions is addictive. Yes, there are side effects with medication. And again, I would rather go into this, much more on a different, level, in a different conversation. But just for the purpose of this conversation right now and addressing this misconception, yes, medications have their side effects, but many are not addictive. So surprisingly enough, many medications are not addictive and can be very effective in managing symptoms. So you want to make sure that you connect with a credentialed, certified, licensed mental health professional, or healthcare professional, I should say, that can help educate you, inform you, and really walk you through the process of managing any of the potential risks that comes with medications that you might be prescribed or that, a professional is going to be suggesting to you. A couple more before we get into stigmas about mental health. The last two misconceptions: children and adolescents don't experience mental health problems. We kind of talked about that already. Yes, they do. It is very, very prevalent. It's very common. We see it all the time. Mental health issues can affect people of all ages, including children and adolescents. Early intervention is crucial for addressing these issues effectively. So the earlier that we can kind of get a jump start on addressing these issues, the more success, or the greater the likelihood of success that we'll have to address these issues. And like I said, we can kind of correct the ship and getting people on the right path towards healing and to living very successful and productive lives. But mental health does not discriminate, especially when it comes to age. So we want to make sure that we're getting our kids, young children, older children, adolescents, young adults, that we're getting them the right services and supports that they need. And lastly, talking about mental health makes it worse. No. Again, with the right supports, with the right systems in place, with the right resources, talking about mental health, I think just make things actually better. You know, when you can, there's power in being able to connect with somebody that can understand you. They don't have to necessarily, go through exactly what it is that you've been through. They don't necessarily need to know the details, through and through about what it is that you've experienced. But just being able to sit with somebody or talk to somebody that can make you feel seen, that can make you feel understood, that can make you feel like you're being heard, that's the therapy right there. That's the therapeutic experience that people are looking for. And that's when the healing really happens. You know what I mean? So it doesn't get better by avoiding. Again, we don't want to be sweeping things under the rug, because if it gets left unaddressed, it's only going to stay there to trip you up at some point. And you're going to have to address it. You're going to have to clean it up. So we're better off actually addressing it. We're actually better off talking about mental health. And again, I'm glad that we're actually having these conversations, and other people are spearheading them too. It's really important that we have these discussions so that way we can reduce stigmas, which we're about to get into. We can support. We can encourage people to get the help that they need. Isolating yourself is really not the answer. I do believe that there is power in being able to sit with and understand what's happening with you, and to want to do that for yourself. But I do not recommend people doing that in isolation for long periods of time. I don't. I do think that it's really important that people find somebody that they can connect with, to kind of help spearhead the work that they're doing. So if you can find somebody to connect with, I highly encourage you to do that, because you don't want to make the issue worse. And by staying to yourself all the time, it's not beneficial. And a lot of the things that I'm saying are actually things that I will be putting into practice myself. I have been putting into practice myself. So these kind of like serve as good reminders for me, because again, as I mentioned before, I'm not perfect. I'm human too. All right. People that know me, I have this tendency of like wanting to be to myself. I want to handle things by myself. I'm not one to ask for help like that, but that is something that I'm working on. I can admit, self-awareness is key. I can admit that, I'm not really quick to, ask for help, but I would be naive to think that I would not be better, or that I can do better, if it isn't for the support that I'm provided by the people around me, be it, professionals, family, friends, colleagues, and even just good Samaritans that, that are rooting for me. I'm sure that there are people out there that I don't know that want to see me do well. And even though I may never see you, I may never know who you are, I may never know your name, I just want to thank you, right? I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your support. Whether you're sharing this, whether you're liking this, whether you're subscribing to this, whatever the case is, whatever discussions you're having on your own with people about something that you saw or heard from this podcast, I appreciate that. I'm just playing my part. I'm just a humble servant. You know what I mean? Just trying to help people live better lives and experience the best for themselves. So those are the misconceptions around mental health that hopefully I was able to debunk, and that we kind of got more clarity on. The next thing I want to go into are the stigmas of mental health. So when I say stigmas, what I'm referring to are these negative connotations about mental health, right? So misconceptions are negative beliefs or false beliefs about mental health. When we talk about stigmas, what we're talking about here are these negative connotations about it. So there are 3 stigmas that I want to go into kind of quickly, because we do have other parts that we want to get into in this episode. But three stigmas that I want to address are public stigmas, self-stigmas, and structural stigmas. Public, self, and structural. So when we talk about public stigmas, what we're referring to are negative attitudes and beliefs held by the general public towards people with mental health issues. So remember before, a lot of these will come up in the misconceptions that are out there, right? So those are examples, those misconceptions that we talked about. Those are examples of public stigmas about mental health, those negative attitudes and beliefs that people have about mental health issues. And what ultimately ends up happening when these misconceptions or these stigmas, these public stigmas, get left unaddressed is that it leads to discrimination, it leads to social exclusion, it reduces opportunities for individuals with mental health conditions in areas such as employment, housing, education, many different facets of life and society. So a good example I could think of would be displaced individuals, or what we would commonly say as homeless people, right? It's many people, and I've been guilty of this myself, so I'm not going to say this as if like I'm holier than thou or I'm better than anybody else, but when you think about displaced individuals, they are often the seemingly, often the most overlooked individuals in our societies. Like we walk past them every day, we see them every day. They're asking for support, they're asking for help, whether it's money, food, whatever the case is. And I noticed, and I'm sure I've been guilty of this myself before I became more sensitive to the population and more compassionate to the population. They're very, very much so overlooked. And people will believe that, they've made their decisions in life to end up where they are, so they don't deserve to get the help that they need, or, they could care less about providing them with the help that they need. And yes, it's very evident that a lot of them, do have mental health conditions. So what ends up happening is that they get left alone, and this isn't just an individual thing, or that this is a thing that people are doing to this population, but our systems are also perpetuating this issue as well too, right? So we see that, displaced individuals are being discriminated against. They get excluded from society. They get looked over. They don't get included in anything, and they just get neglected. They're an easily neglected population, and are very much prone to their symptoms getting worse because their issues are just not getting addressed. So when you have public stigmas about, say, people who are displaced, it doesn't help the conversation at all. So shout out to those people who dedicate their lives and their professions to helping individuals such as those, or any population that they're working with. Again, I'm just using that as one example, but we could think of many different examples of people who do experience discrimination, who do experience some level of exclusion from society, and who are not getting the resources that they need. Listen, I'm Black. We got history when it comes to that. You know what I mean? And that's a whole conversation in and of itself. So when we talk about populations that are being neglected or discriminated against, that's another example. That probably should have been the first example I should have discussed. That's a whole, like I said, that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But that's an example of a public stigma, negative attitudes and beliefs, held by people regarding mental health issues, and how that could actually impact society and people as a whole. Self-stigma, this would be an internalization of public stigma by individuals with mental health issues, leading to feelings of shame, guilt, and low self-esteem. So when you hear about these stigmas that are held with respect to individuals with mental health issues, and you are a person experiencing mental health conditions, you might actually internalize these things that people are saying. And then now you start to see yourself as one of those people that they're talking about. And all that would really want to make you do is just clam up, go into your shell, and just experience a great level of guilt and shame as if you are the problem. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, which is why it's important that we have these conversations so that people know, no, you may not be the issue. Chances are you are not the issue. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't take accountability for the things that you did. Like, we can have some conversations where we can say, yeah, maybe you might be the issue. But that's with respect to other things. But in all seriousness, a lot of times it's really the things that happen to us that manifests itself into the issues that we're exhibiting that other people can see. But because they don't know your story, they don't know exactly what it is that you went through, that you've been dealing with, they're quick to assume that you are the problem. And that's just not necessarily the case. What happened to you is the real problem. That's what we really need to address. We got to address that. Yes, we'll talk about these symptoms that you're experiencing. We'll talk about these experiences that you have. But what we really got to get at is the core and the root of what it is that you've been experiencing so that we can get ourselves back on track in the direction that we need to go. So, again, this internalization of public stigma is an example of self-stigma, which prevents people from seeking help, as I mentioned. It prevents people from getting the treatment that they need and also pursuing opportunities that could actually improve their quality of life. Structural stigma is institutional policies and practices that restrict opportunities for people with mental health conditions. I think we could all think of many different examples in which this plays out. I don't want to get too political, at least not in this episode. But I, as a social worker who has done extensive studies, or studying, I should say, on the role that systems play with respect to how we experience life, our systems can do a whole lot better when it comes to playing their part and making sure that people get the things that they need. And what happens is when you have policies set in place that prevent people from getting the help that they need, it really perpetuates the issues that we oftentimes talk about with respect to mental health, right? So how this actually shows up is inadequate funding for institutions, inadequate funding for programs where they're unable to get the resources, or even, which includes human resources, right, to do the work that they set out to do to help individuals. Like, we can come up with a great idea to want to help a certain population in need, but if you ain't got the money to get it done, how you gonna get it done? Like, there's only so much that you can do. And systems have to implement policies in place that can enable programs, institutions, companies to do the work that they want to set out to do to help people, right? But until that happens, these issues that we're seeing, these issues that are coming up, it's not going to get any better. So the idea that these policies are in place to restrict opportunities for people to address their mental health conditions is an example of structural stigma. And we want to make sure that we get involved one way or another in making sure that our systems that are set in place are held accountable to making sure that they play their part in providing for the very people that they claim that they are protecting and serving. So that is the extent of like my political take on things, but we'll definitely have opportunities to kind of dive into that some more. So we've went over misconceptions, we've went over stigmas, we went over myths about mental health, these negative beliefs and these false facts out there about what that is. Now, what can we actually do to reduce the onset of misconceptions and stigmas being placed out there? So I was able to identify 5 ways in which that we can go about doing that, right? So one of the ways in which that we can reduce misconceptions and stigmas is through education and awareness. I think it's pretty straightforward. I think the more that we can educate people, the more that we can raise awareness about it, then I think the better off we are with respect to improving the conversation and our approach and the work that we're doing when it comes to improving mental health. So what this could look like, it could come in the form of campaigns and programs. So if we implement public awareness campaigns to educate people about mental health and dispel a lot of these myths that exist about mental health, then I think that's a step in the right direction. So creating and implementing campaigns that will raise public awareness to educate people about mental health is one way to do that. I think an example of that is, through school programming, where if we incorporate mental health programs into our schools, into our education system, to promote understanding of mental health importance and why people should prioritize that. If we could start those conversations at an early age, I really think that we can really make a lot of great things happen at that point. Another way to reduce misconceptions and stigma, promote open dialogue, have community discussions, encourage open conversations about mental health in communities, in workplaces, in schools. There are plenty of examples that are out there that you can probably find on social media. I know I've seen them. It's even happening at, the barbershop that I go to, where they're holding these conversations around mental health. The more that we're actually able to engage in these open conversations, and again, even platforms like this and, other podcasts that are out there too, but, you want to be here in the lab. But, the more that we have these conversations, the better off we're going to be. So one of the ways in which that we can actually encourage these conversations is by sharing personal stories. So, I even talked about some of the things that I've gone through, and I'll go over some more, to kind of open up the conversation some more too. But sharing our personal stories, the power in that is allowing people to see that they're not the only ones that are going through the things that they're going through. I think once people are able to connect with other people or relate to other people in that way, I think that is the start, or that could be the start of the chain of events that could happen in somebody's life to make the work happen, to get them on track to where they want to be at. So I think that people, I encourage people to be more courageous about sharing their stories, sharing their personal stories about mental health and what they've gone through and what, they've experienced, because you never know who needs to hear it. You never know who needs to hear it. I've kept a lot of things close to my chest with respect to things that I've experienced. Some things that, people still don't really know about, except for my therapist, really, that for me to find a way to kind of translate that information to other people that can benefit from it, is really the blessing. You know what I mean? So your story could be your testimony, and, that could be your gift right there. That could really make a difference in somebody's life. So I definitely encourage people to find ways to be able to tell their story in a way that's productive and can help other people. Another way to reduce misconceptions and stigmas about mental health, support systems, so peer support groups, promoting family education. If we're able to establish support groups where individuals can share their experiences, like I said, through personal stories, and offer mutual support to one another, I think that's a great way to go about doing that. Promoting family education, being able to educate families on how to support loved ones with mental health conditions. That's another great example in which that we can promote mental health and reduce misconceptions and stigmas about mental health. I think that's a really powerful tool, especially like within families. And I think that's one way that we can improve the state of families within America, particularly. I think that's a whole nother conversation in and of itself as well. We got a lot of topics that we can get into. So I'm excited about what is going to come from this podcast and the talks that we're going to have. Another way to reduce misconceptions and stigmas, access to resources. So if we get people access to resources, getting them the professional help that they need, providing them with online resources, I think is a real game changer. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. And then last but not least, advocacy and policy change. So again, we talked about the role that systems play, especially through the creation of policies, the ways in which that people or systems can improve the quality of life for individuals. We want to make sure that the more involved that we are in impacting our systems, I think the better the level and quality of help that we can get to people. So I think the more that we're able to do that, I think the better off we're going to be. So those are some of the ways in which that we can reduce stigmas and myths. So the next part that we're going to get into are current events. So this is the part of the show where we will review an article that I came across that talks about a variety of different topics pertaining to mental health that, I think is worth, doing a deeper dive on. We can talk more about how these things actually show up and how we can actually relate to them. Give me 1 second. So let me make sure that we get this right. I'm about to fix that. But yeah, one of the ways that we can kind of advance the conversation around mental health is really seeing what's happening in the world these days and seeing how we can actually relate to what's happening, and using it as an opportunity to kind of share our personal experiences and, learn something new. So I came across this one article by Dr. Guy Ischikov, who is an associate professor in the Department of Human Services at the University of Haifa in Israel, who wrote a dope piece on attentive listening. It's titled "When Listening Hurts, How Attentive Listening Can Backfire." He starts off the article by saying that while listening builds deep connections, it can also lead to emotional burnout. You can say that again. I'm actually particularly interested in this topic because of the fact that my research was actually on burnout. So I did my doctoral research exploring teacher burnout and the effectiveness of mindfulness-based interventions, which we'll talk about a little bit later in terms of like what mindfulness is, what mindfulness-based interventions are. But ultimately, what they do is pretty much they help you to reduce stress. So you learn strategies in which that you can kind of reduce stress, which alleviates symptoms of burnout, which encompasses emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, or a sense of like disconnect from other people that you care for, and also a lack of a sense of personal accomplishment. So when you're experiencing any of those components, what you're experiencing is a symptom of burnout. If you're feeling emotionally exhausted, if you're feeling disconnected from people, especially the people that you're responsible for caring for, whether personally or on a professional level, or if you're not really feeling like you've contributed enough or that you've done something substantial, those are sure, clear signs that you might be experiencing burnout. So the idea that attentive listening can actually contribute towards symptoms of burnout, I thought was actually pretty interesting, and it makes a lot of sense. I think given the work that I do, when you're listening, listen. Shout out to those in the professions of helping people, especially if that's your full-time gig, your full-time job, if that's your life's work, if that's your profession, especially therapists. For me, given my time constraints, I only see about 2 to 3 clients a day at night. And this is after I get through my day job, my 9 to 5, working in education as a program manager. But when you're listening and working with people for 2 to 3 hours, back to back to back, sometimes with like no break in between, and you're listening and you're proactive in helping people navigate the issues that they want to address, it's taxing, man. It's not for the faint of heart, like it's really not. And for those who know, if you know, you know. But it's a lot of work. And for me personally, one of the things that I implement in my sessions and my work is active listening. I do believe that being able to actively listen is a very powerful skill to have. Not just as a therapist, but I think it's something that people should just be doing themselves in their own personal lives, So having to do that, not even just in my personal life, but also doing it professionally speaking, this caught my attention, the fact that attentive listening can backfire. So what Dr. Ischikov, hopefully I'm not butchering his name, shout out to Dr. Guy Ischikov, He went on to say that conversations are like two-way streets. We take turns speaking and listening. While we often focus on what we say, there's something profoundly effective in the act of listening, which I can agree with. It can deepen intimacy, build trust, strengthen social bonds. In addition to that, it can also expand our understanding of the world around us. It can even foster open-mindedness for our speakers. So it's really no surprise that when we think of listening, positive words like empathy, trust, respect, understanding, collaboration, and growth comes to mind. But he goes on to say that this is where it gets tricky. So he would say that being a good listener isn't easy, which is a fact. Listening, taking my eyes off of this for a second, listening does require a level of attentiveness that in this day and age, given, and again, this is speaking from an American perspective, right? Living in the West, living in an age where things are coming at us, at a rapid pace, especially with respect to information, different stimuli from all over the place, it's very easy to get distracted. So by seeing him say, or reading him say, seeing the fact that he's saying that being a good listener isn't easy, it's true. Our minds can drift off into other places without even realizing it. And we may not even be intentional about it drifting, but sometimes it just happens. He goes on to say that it can be emotionally draining, especially in tough conversations. So think about the last time someone vented their frustrations or shared their pain with you. Did you find yourself feeling emotionally weighed down afterward? That's because emotions are contagious, which is very true. You find yourself being around somebody who's bringing their negative moods or their feelings around, and you stick around them long enough, you're going to find yourself feeling very similar to how they're feeling too. It just happens. The feelings, vibes, I would say, as we know, I think in more casual language, vibes are contagious for sure. When people say don't bring that negative energy around me, I don't want to feel that. It's a thing. It's a real thing. So we have to be very aware of what other people are feeling and do things that prevents that from coming onto us. And I think that the more aware that we are about that, then I think the better off that we are with respect to being able to kind of keep those things at bay, which is a matter of boundary setting. But we'll talk a little bit more about how to go about doing that. So Dr. Ishchakov goes on to say that he talked about how he and some colleagues explored the downsides of listening in a study that they conducted with school teachers, which I thought was pretty interesting. So what they did was they asked teachers how much effort that they think they put into listening to their students. And they found that the more effort teachers put into listening, the more they reported feeling burnt out. Again, the more effort that they put into listening, the more they reported feeling burnt out. Even when they considered other factors like motivation, job satisfaction, and self-esteem, only listening was linked to higher burnout, which is very interesting. So the question is, well, why exactly does that happen? Right? You would think that, well, all you're doing is just listening, right? Well, not so much. He goes on to say that for teachers, listening really isn't just about hearing words. It involves absorbing their students' emotional challenges, frustrations, and struggles. And this can be incredibly draining, especially when teachers feel responsible for solving problems that they may not have the resources or time to address. So over time, what ends up happening is that emotional load accumulates, leading to stress and then eventually burnout, right? So in other words, teachers aren't just educators. They often serve as emotional caregivers, and the emotional toll can be very significant. This phenomenon, known as compassion fatigue, is common amongst professionals who regularly listen to negative content, such as nurses and social workers. So research shows that people who are of the helping profession, as they would say, are very prone to burnout. So this would include health professionals, doctors, physicians, nurses, teachers, as we're seeing here, which I can attest to this and know this to be very true, especially given the research that I've done. Teachers are very much prone to burnout. and social workers, mental health professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, people who are facilitating therapy sessions and have people under their care. These individuals are very much prone to experiencing compassion fatigue, where you kind of get to a point where you're just like, you don't know if you really have it in you to listen to another story. You have a hard time empathizing with other people because you've just taken on so much from what you've been hearing so far. It could be a lot for people. And this really isn't a problem. I know this already, but this actually gets into the next point that Dr. Itchikov brings up in his article, in that this isn't just a problem that teachers are experiencing. It actually affects everybody. So if you've experienced, like I said, emotional exhaustion, if you've experienced disconnect from other people, if you kind of feel like you're not contributing enough, or kind of have a hard time seeing what it is that you've accomplished, chances are you've experienced symptoms of burnout. And he goes on to say that whether we're parents, whether we're partners, friends, or colleagues, we all find ourselves in situations where we have to listen to others talk about the things that they're worried about, talk about the things that they're stressed out about. And whether we realize it or not, we are actually absorbing that energy that we're getting from other people. And over time, if not dealt with, this emotional burnout will wear us down, leading to exhaustion or burnout. And in a world where we're constantly connected and expected to be there for other people, we need to be aware of the emotional cost of listening, especially in this day and age. You take social media, for example. We have a hard time disconnecting from one another. And I think that while having these ways to connect with people is great, it's powerful, I think a lot of good has come from it. I think because some people have a hard time disconnecting, they make themselves more prone to experiencing burnout. And when you're constantly exposing yourself to negative content, not even just things that people will tell you, but things that you're watching, things that you're listening to, it's only a matter of time until it starts to affect you. So how can we actually listen without burning out? So I don't want people listening to this thinking that, oh, well, the article says that listening leads to burnout, so I guess I shouldn't be listening to people no more. No, that's not what we're saying. Or at least that's not what I'm saying. And I dare you to apply that in your relationship. For those of you in relationships, if you want to mess around and find out what happens if you tell your partner that, listening to you is, stressing me out, there's some research showing that I shouldn't be listening to you. All right, you're going to be single real quick, all right? So there are ways in which that we can actually listen without burning out. So how do we go about doing that? So in the article, the doctor mentions that listening during difficult conversations, he admits that it's not easy and there's really no quick fix to it. So just like any skill, being able to listen does take practice, but there are ways to manage it so that we don't feel overwhelmed. First, he suggests that focusing on listening without planning your response. So when you're listening to people talk, try not to plan or think about what you want to say next. Not everything warrants a response. He goes on to say that this should keep you present and allow the speaker, the person that's talking, to really feel heard. So you can kind of tell like when somebody isn't really paying attention to what you're saying. They're more focused on coming up with a rebuttal or trying to find a time to interject and interrupt whatever you're saying or interrupt your train of thought so that they can kind of get out what they want to share with you. You can kind of tell when that's about to happen. And how you end up feeling is that the person really isn't paying attention to you. They hear what you're saying, but they're not really listening. There is a difference between listening and hearing. Hearing is merely a biological function that many of us have. Take into consideration that there are people with auditory conditions and issues that may not be able to. But the idea or the concept of hearing is merely just a biological function of our bodies to pick up sound, process them, and to experience what we call hearing. Listening is a very intentional act that requires intentional understanding and processing of what one is saying so that you're able to connect with them, right? And when you feel like you are being listened to, you feel like you are in a safe place, which is why therapy is so effective, assuming that you're working with a therapist who is good at that, right? So again, focus on listening without planning your response. This keeps you present and allows the speaker to feel truly heard. Second, understand that sometimes listening isn't enough. Don't feel obligated to fix the problem unless you're explicitly asking for advice. Often listening, even without taking action, is healing. Sometimes all you got to do is really just listen, right? And I really appreciate the fact that he's emphasizing this here, and that you don't have to feel obligated to fix the problem or say something as if like it has to be so profound that it's going to fix this person's issue. Sometimes people don't want that. A lot of times I find that people aren't necessarily looking for advice. They just want somebody to listen to them. I'll even go as far as to say that I think a lot of times people actually know what they want to do. They know, or at least, have the answers to the problems that they want to address. A lot of times people are really just looking for confirmation, right? Hence why they want to talk to somebody to kind of walk through and talk through their thoughts, to get some type of feedback from somebody. Or other times they don't even want to hear anything. They just want to talk and just keep it moving. And I think that in some cases, when you're able to provide that space for people, that is good enough. Just give people space to speak. You can inquire about, whether or not they actually want to hear from you, or if they want feedback, ask them that. But you don't always have to feel like you have to reflect or paraphrase or come up with an answer. Dr. Ishtrakov goes on to say that while paraphrasing can be helpful in many situations, when someone is sharing a deeply negative experience like the loss of a loved one, reflecting those emotions back to them can only deepen their pain. So sometimes people don't necessarily want to hear back what they've shared because they already acknowledge the negative emotions that they're experiencing. And sometimes hearing it back from a person could only make that person feel even worse. So when it comes to attentive listening, I do think that it does require discernment to know what to say, when to say it, if you should even say it. And that takes a lot of practice. Nobody's perfect. I'm still learning how to do that myself. But it's really, personally one of my favorite tools or strategies to implement when it comes to communication. And to end the article, he goes on to say that ultimately, while listening is one of the most powerful tools we have for connection, it's important to recognize that it comes with emotional costs. And the key is really finding a balance, knowing when to fully engage and when to take a step back to protect your own well-being. By refining our listening skills and being mindful of the emotional toll it can take, we can support others without burning ourselves out. Listening is a gift, but like any gift, it requires care. When we practice high-quality listening, we uplift those around us while safeguarding our own mental health, ensuring that we stay resilient in the long run. In a world that's increasingly distracted, mastering the art of balanced listening can help us foster deeper, healthier relationships with those who matter most. So that is, again, an article written by Dr. Guy Itchakov, talking about how attentive listening can backfire if you don't implement the right boundaries in place to kind of help you manage your own well-being. Dr. Guy Itchakov, I'm butchering this name. I hope he forgives me. If you're listening to this, please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. Dr. Ishtrakov is an associate professor in the Department of Human Services at the University of Haifa. And the main, points to take away from this is that we take on stress and frustrations of others when we listen to emotionally charged situations, recognizing that listening alone is healing, or recognizing that listening alone is healing. This allows us to help others without losing ourselves in the process, and learning to set emotional boundaries while listening helps prevent burnout and maintains mental well-being. So I know that this is something that I'm gonna, reflect on for myself, but I couldn't agree more with the points that the good doctor came up with. And I hope that this is something that resonated with you all too. Moving right along, the next segment of our show I like to call this in session. So in session is where we are going to be going over real life situations that people are asking for support with. These submissions are situations that people are dealing with, and they're looking to seek advice, and they want to know how to address this particular issue. So I'm going to go over what this is, what the issue is, and then I'm going to provide my take on how to address the matter from the perspective of a licensed mental health professional. In addition to that, I'm going to give my take on how to handle the situation, just as me personally, just me being myself, which still the thinking is very much along the same lines, but how I would approach a situation or how I would walk somebody through a situation as their therapist is a bit different than how I would engage with somebody in a conversation about their issue if I'm just like, if I'm their friend or if I'm their family member or basically somebody who's not their therapist. Because the way that we as therapists engage in conversations or help people through the issues that they want to work through, again, isn't focused on giving you advice. We're not here to give you the answers. The work entails you finding the answer for yourself. Our role is merely just to help you navigate the process to figure that out, right? And to walk you through it. And sometimes that takes time. We got to be patient about the process. But we kind of more so focus on helping you get there as opposed to just giving you the answers straight up to get you there. We don't want to rob you of the experience that the Therapeutic Alliance can have in having those breakthrough moments that people are looking for, which really does empower the individual. So the way that we engage in conversations as mental health professionals is different than what we would do, say, off the clock with somebody that that we're close with, say like a family member or a friend. So basically, again, I'm giving my take on how to handle the given situation if they were in session with me. So here's the situation. So we have an entry here. The question is, how do I make my girlfriend like me again? So what we have here is a 21-year-old male asking how he can make his girlfriend, who is 19 years old, like him again. Well, let's see. He says, my girlfriend and I have been together for 2 years now. In the beginning, she was flirty and always wanted to have sex with me. She would be the one to initiate it at least 70% of the time. Slowly over the last 6 months, she has started pulling away. I will try to kiss her and she won't give me a proper kiss back. I try and touch her and she'll move away or tell me she's not in the mood. It feels like she has no interest in me anymore. Anytime I've tried bringing up the topic and having a conversation about it, she tells me, quote, all you want me for is sex. But it's not just sex. I would just like it to feels like my partner is actually attracted and interested in me. I take it this person is trying to say that it's not just about sex. They just want their partner to be attracted and interested in them. So basically what I'm gathering here is that this young man is saying that his girl's not into him no more. What he's noticed is that they're not as intimate as they used to be. Based on the feedback that he's getting from his girlfriend, she feels as though that she is only being used for intimacy in the form of sex, and she doesn't like it. And he's trying to figure out why there's been this shift. So I preface this by saying I don't know the particulars or all the particulars about this given situation. But what I will say is that if this was somebody that was coming to me and was seeking my take on this, one of the things that I would want to inquire about is, well, what is it that makes your girlfriend feel connected to you? Or what would you say kind of connected the two of you in the first place? Right? Because clearly something changed at some point. it wasn't always like this. I take it just from reading this that, you know, they were constantly getting it in the very beginning. He was saying that his girlfriend was the one that would initiate it at least 70% of the time. So this implies to me that things were good in the beginning, right? There were no issues in that department. But over time, things started shifting, and he noticed that she was pulling away. So one of the things that I would wonder is, well, why is she pulling away? Which is, you know, why he's submitting this question in the first place. But I'm wondering if this individual asked this question to her directly. And if he has, I wonder what her response to that question was. If I was to speculate, and I could be wrong, because again, I don't know these people, but if I was to speculate, I would assume or guess, and we have this thing that my supervisor taught me, is that we have a therapeutic hunch, because again, we don't have all the answers. We can only speculate a lot of times because again, I don't have all the information here. But I can speculate that perhaps at some point, this individual's girlfriend is not feeling the emotional connection that she's looking for. Now, again, I don't know this young lady. I don't know what it is that she's looking for in a relationship. I don't know what she wants in her relationship from her partner. But I believe that for sexual chemistry to be optimized, there has to be a strong, consistent, and reliable emotional connection between the people involved. And without that, I would imagine that it would be very hard to maintain a level of interest and engagement that will allow people to experience this level of intimacy at their preferred level or their preferred standard. So I imagine that somewhere along the line there had to have been, or there probably was, a disconnect between these two, where perhaps she feels as though that her needs are not being met. And when that happens, people will disconnect and disengage in many different ways. And sex is really just one of them. So if people just start backing out or disengaging sexually when sex has been a common part of the dynamic, then usually that implies that there's something else at play there, right? And I think that that is an indication or an implication of a larger issue at play. So rather than, asking, I don't know if this is exactly how he's been wording the question or this is how he's approaching it, but rather than saying like, oh, how come you don't sleep with me no more? Yeah, that's going to give off to her that all you're focused about is having sex, when that may not necessarily be the issue that needs to get addressed. Now, if you were to ask the question, yo, babe, you put on your charm, you do that thing, whatever it was that kind of got her attention in the first place, be like, oh, babe, I notice, if that's how you talk. I don't know if that's how you talk, but, I'm from New York. We have a different lingo, different, a way to, communicate to somebody. But it'd be like, babe, I noticed that, we've been disconnected for some time. Is everything all right? I really want to talk and understand, what's going on with you, and, what can I do to help? What can I do to get us back on track? Is there anything you want to talk to me about? That's a lot different than just focusing on the sex or the lack thereof. Because, if that's how you're going to go about it, then, again, that implies that that's all you're focused on. But if your girlfriend was to hear from you that you are aware that something is wrong or something is bothering her that is outside of this issue of the lack of sex, then that just might open the door for a deeper conversation to get to the issue that is actually in the way of you two experiencing this level of intimacy that y'all have been engaging in. But unless you make that attempt to connect with her in that way, this is going to continue to be a problem. It's just not going to get any better. So what I would encourage you to do, if if you were my client, if you were in my office, I would encourage you to be genuine and intentional with attempting to understand what is it that your girlfriend is experiencing. And people can pick up when they're being genuine about something, when somebody's being genuine about something. If you're going to come through and just fake the funk, if you're going to be quick to point the finger, as if she's the problem and, you're not doing anything wrong, or you're not showing a willingness to want to address the issue, then you're not going to have much success in alleviating the issue here. So you want to tread lightly, and you want to come through in a position of empathy. You want to show that you're empathetic and that you are willing to understand what it is that she's dealing with. Because if not, then this is only going to be an issue, which I can also see potentially this being the demise of the relationship. Because again, if people don't feel connected, they're not going to want to stay there. They're not going to want to stay in that relationship, in that setting, in that dynamic. And people will end up venturing off into finding other ways or other places where they can get that level of connection that they're looking for. So I think that this is an issue that can be addressed. I think it can be salvaged. That would be my professional advice. My personal advice, would be more so on the same lines of focusing on, what is it that's bothering her. I do think that there is some type of disconnect that's happening there, but you got to be upfront and be willing to have those difficult conversations. You might even hear something that you didn't really want to hear. She might have some type of feedback for you that, she's been really reluctant to share with you, that may not even be related to, the sex. And, are you going to be able to stomach that? You know what I mean? So you have to be open-minded enough and willing enough and patient enough to want to hear her perspective. And I think once you're able to do that, and she's receptive to your attempt to want to connect with her in that way, then I think that you are well on your way to restoring the level and quality of connection that y'all once had, or perhaps even better, But these things take practice. They definitely take practice. So that's my take on that. Hopefully, that was helpful. Feel free to reach out and, keep me posted, on what happens. And, feel free, to the audience, if you have any thoughts on this, comment below. Let me know what you think. Would you approach it differently? Do you have any suggestions on how they should, or how he should, go about addressing this issue? Give us your thoughts. I'm curious to know and hear what you think. All right. So that takes care of that for In Session. Next, before we wrap up, I have doctor's orders. So this segment of the show, being the doctor of social work that I am, I have a couple suggestions on how to mitigate stress, and ways in which that you can not live a stress-free life as much as we might want to strive for that, but implement some things that can be done on a regular basis to help manage our stress in a very successful way. But before we get into those suggestions, really quickly, I just want to, at a basic level, go over exactly what it means to implement mindfulness-based stress reduction practices, which entails breaking down, what stress is, what mindfulness is, what mindfulness-based stress reduction strategies are, and how that can actually play a part in improving our mental health. So when we talk about stress, what we're really talking about is a state of worry or mental tension caused by a difficult situation. Stress is a natural human response that prompts us to address challenges and threats in our lives. Everyone experiences stress to some degree. The way we respond to stress, however, makes a big difference to our overall well-being. Chances are every single person watching this stream or watching this video or listening to this podcast has experienced stress at some point in their life. We all have. Babies experience stress, right? You hear a baby crying, they're stressed out in that moment. They may not be able to articulate what it is that they're stressed out about, but they are experiencing stress nonetheless. So we've all had experiences with stress. All right. So being in that constant state, or being in a state of worry or mental tension caused by a difficult situation. How exactly does stress affect us? Stress affects both the mind and the body. Right. So a little bit of stress is good. Sometimes we might need stress. There are ways that we can use stress to our advantage, and is actually pretty necessary. If you're experiencing like a very scary or threatening event, that stress that you feel is an indication that we might want to do something about this. So it can serve a purpose in the sense that it's providing you with information so that you can make the right decision and act on it. So a little bit of stress is good in that sense and can actually help us perform daily activities. The problem is when we have too much stress, which can cause physical and mental health problems. So learning how to cope with stress can actually help us feel less overwhelmed and support our mental and physical well-being. So what does it look like when we're actually experiencing stress? I know this seems very basic, but I think it's important that we have this conversation just for the sake of grounding our understanding in what stress is and what it looks like. So stress actually makes it hard for us to relax and can come with a range of emotions. So if you're experiencing anxiety, if you're experiencing irritability, frustration, anything of that sort, you are experiencing stress in that moment, right? So when we're stressed, we may find it difficult to concentrate. We may also experience headaches or other body pains, an upset stomach, or trouble sleeping. Kind of mentioned this before. Oftentimes we may find that we lose our appetite or eat more than usual, so like I mentioned with depression, sometimes depending on what your body does, your digestive system is going to shut down. So if you find yourself eating less, that may be the reason why. Or if you are snacking more, it's not so much because you're hungry. You're using that as a way to cope with the stress that you're experiencing in that moment. Chronic stress can actually worsen pre-existing health problems and may increase our use of alcohol, tobacco, and other harmful substances. Stressful situations can also cause or exacerbate mental health conditions, most commonly anxiety and depression, which require access to healthcare. So when we suffer from a mental health condition, it may actually be because our symptoms of stress that we're experiencing in the moment have become much more persistent. And they may have started affecting our daily functioning, which may include, our school life, our work life, and what have you. So the question is, does everyone, respond to stress the same way? No. Many people have different ways in which that they go about, dealing with stress. Some are healthy, going to therapy, going out for a walk, exercising, talking to other people, friends, family, what have you, listening to music, resting, taking a nap, which I'm overdue for. Those are some healthy ways in which that we could deal with stress. And unfortunately, there are some ways in which people deal with stress in unhealthy ways as well, too. So it's again, very natural to experience stress in challenging situations such as, if you're going on a job interview, you're taking an exam, workloads that may be, beyond your capacity, an insecure job, not knowing what's going to happen next, conflict with family, friends, or, with people that you work with. Stress can show up in all of these different situations. But the one thing to keep in mind is that stress tends to be widespread during events such as, major economic crises, disease outbreaks, all these different situations. So there are many different ways in which, stress can come up. And yes, you can expect stress to show up in very difficult situations, but ultimately not everyone handles stress the same way. People have different ways of coping with stress, and dealing with the symptoms that comes with that too. So if you're feeling stressed out, does this mean that you can't work? Well, that depends. It's not always a yes, it's not always a no, because a lot of people actually are capable of managing stress in a very healthy way. But there are people who do have a hard time coping with the stress that they're experiencing. And some individuals may actually need to seek help, professional help, to address some of these issues that they're dealing with. And if you're going to seek help, again, make sure that you are seeking a credentialed person. If you are looking for therapy, make sure that the person that you're working with is licensed to do so in the jurisdiction that you're at, because mental health is really important, and that's not something that you want to cut corners with. So you want to make sure that you're getting quality care. So what are some ways that you can manage stress? So there are many different ways that you can manage stress. I'm going to give, very specific examples or strategies in which that we can do that. One way is through learning stress management, which can be done through mindfulness-based stress reduction strategies, which I'll give 2 examples of in just a minute. Keeping a daily routine, making sure that you're getting plenty of sleep, connecting with other people, eating healthy, treating your body right, exercising regularly. And also another practical way is limiting the amount of time that you are exposed to media outlets such as the news, because Lord knows there's a lot of things on the news that's being reported that don't actually make us feel better, So we really want to be mindful about that. So those are some ways in which that we can actually manage stress. 2 strategies that I would recommend for people to engage in would be body scan meditation and focused breathing, both very effective evidence-based practices that can actually help you to alleviate the stress that you're experiencing. And again, when we talk about mindfulness, really what I'm referring to is the ability to obtain moment by moment non-judgmental awareness of what you're experiencing. So in other words, being able to identify and be aware of what it is that you're experiencing right now in terms of feelings, thoughts, and actually what's happening around you in that moment without applying any particular judgment to that thing, right? It's a skill that can be learned through practice, and it actually helps promote well-being. So when we talk about mindfulness, that's what we're referring to. So in talking about mindfulness-based stress reduction practices, these are the things that people do in order to practice that level of moment by moment or in the moment non-judgmental awareness about what's happening to them and actually what's happening around them. So body scan meditation is a great way to do that, and focused breathing. I actually, have some videos that I encourage you to check out to see what exactly that looks like. So make sure that you look into that and you check that out. Very effective tools. I'm gonna be recommending the body scan much more. Having an understanding about what exactly that is. Focused breathing has been like one of my new favorite things to do. Understanding that there's actually a difference in the way that we breathe and how that actually impacts the way that we experience stress reduction. So like one of the things that I learned was that a lot of times when we're stressed out, we tend to breathe from our chest. And the more effective way to actually breathe is through our diaphragm, through that spot like right under your stomach. And if done effectively, these things can actually help us, feel a lot better. So check out the videos as reference, so I can walk you through step by step how to engage in these practices. And hopefully, this is something that you'll, put into practice yourself. So now you got 2 ways in which that you can reduce your stress. And that pretty much does it, y'all. That's all we got for episode 1, which is a lot. I know it's a lot, but thankfully, you can play this back, pause this, as many times as you want to, take it in doses or what have you, and use this to your advantage. Again, I think it's really important that we engage in these conversations about mental health, that we educate ourselves, that we position ourselves for success, especially when it comes down to our well-being. And I'm really excited about what's to come. We got a lot of great things that are in store that's on the way. This is really just the beginning. But I'm glad that we can actually get this underway and that we can get this started. And I'm excited to hear from you all. So please chime in. I'm open to feedback. I want to know what you're thinking. I want to know what you're feeling. I want to know how I can help support you get to the place in your life that you want to get to and experience that quality of life that you want to experience. And I'm also open to feedback in ways that I can, improve this show too. Not everything went according to plan today with respect to this recording, but I'm good with that. I'm good with that. Being able to go with the flow, being able to adjust and pivot, helps me to manage my stress. And, we can get into that another time about how to go about doing that. Reframing, I think, is a secret weapon of mine. And again, this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. And you are welcome here anytime because your access has been granted. You are here in the lab. This is In the Lab podcast with me, Dr. Dexter Daniel. Till next time, take care.